Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast, part of the Minute Media Podcast Network. The Detroit Lions are now in a new, grittier era, and we look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players, gaining more insight on what makes this team go. Welcome to another episode. The NFL draft is almost here, and the Lions, they have some decisions to make. In this episode, we're diving into roster needs, draft targets, and the spots where Detroit could make some of their biggest impact. We'll get to all of that and more. Let's get to it, Lions fans.
This is Trevor Nowatzki, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
Joining me today is Coach Jerry Angers, a former Michigan High School Coach of the Year. He was also named Coach of the Week by the Detroit Lions. He's the scouting and training director for Bull Rush Sports. Coach, it's just about that time.
No, it's a great time. Again, we're on the upward trajectory to the season.
And joining us to talk about that upward trajectory is a sports writer of the year for Community Newspaper Holdings Incorporated. That is a senior sports writer for the Traverse City Record Eagle, James Cook. James, can't wait to hear some of the stuff you've undug for this one.
Well, thanks. I'm just glad that draft day is no longer the holy grail for Lions fans, and that there's more important things now. So still
no longer the pinnacle.
One of my favorites, but
Yes, it's no longer the thing you look forward to hope that it changes everything. It's still important, still going to play a vital role, but it is different. All right, as we get started, let's hit on draft locations a minute. It wasn't that long ago the draft was in Detroit. That was a couple years ago. This year it's going to be in Pittsburgh. It was in Green Bay last year. And next year, folks, it's going to be out in the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. So by the numbers, Green Bay hit 600,000 or 600,000 plus is what they're saying. Pretty impressive, all things considered. Detroit has the record at 775,000 the year before. Nashville did have it at 600,000 back in 2019. James, and then Coach, any predictions on the Pittsburgh numbers? Are they going to hit Detroit numbers? What are you thinking?
I don't know. It could. I mean, they've got so many metro areas close to that. It's not that far away from, say New York and Pittsburgh for fans to make trips. Cleveland even, not too bad from Detroit. So they could gather from a pretty large area. I think that they'll have pretty decent numbers. I don't know if they'll beat Detroit. Detroit just kind of is an anomaly, but I think that they'll probably rival the Green Bay numbers.
All right, Coach, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's going to be close, and I think no matter what they do, they're going to list it higher than ours just so that they said they had a better one. But we all know better. Nobody's going to beat us.
I'm gonna say they're gonna do well. Pittsburgh is got the infrastructure, right? They've got and they've got location to some other metropolitan places that aren't that far away. You can drive there. So I'm gonna throw in 750,000. I think they're gonna eclipse Green Bay and maybe come just short of what Detroit was at. But we'll see. Time will tell, and that time is coming up here in less than 2 weeks. All right, before we look forward, let's take a look back. We're not going to go too far back. We're not going to look at all the draft classes of Brad Holmes, but we're going to look at the last two because it's time to evaluate those a little bit, see how those have impacted things, and also realize that the Lions are in a spot that I think we're a little bit different than the last couple. It wasn't that long ago that we're sitting here thinking, man, only one or two of these guys could maybe be a starter on the current squad. This year, the Lions are going in knowing they want to find a couple of starters in this draft class that can be starters in this squad. So let's start with 2 years ago. We had the first round pick of Terran Arnold. That's the one in Detroit. The Lions traded up for it. James was part of that monstrous roar when it took place. They grabbed Enos Rakestraw in the second round. Now, that's a defensive back who has not seen the field very much. But at the time, people were mocking the Lions to draft him at the end of the first round. So that seemed like a great move. No third-round pick. In the fourth round, they had Giovanni Manu, Sione Vaki. And then in the sixth round, Makai Wingo, Christian Mahogany. Coach, it's only been 2 years. Some of these guys have been battling some injuries. What are you looking at with this draft class so far?
Well, I think we don't want to look at this draft class as much as if it was one of our beginning first draft classes, then it would be oh my God, what a waste, what a bad draft class. But this one was kind of filling in pieces or getting other new starters or getting backups. So, when I look at something like that, TA, he didn't, Rickstraw's been injured. Uh, Giovanni's a monster, but he didn't play much last year. So, but we didn't need him to start. Vaki's the one that, when he's playing, the special teams have been unbelievable. I still think Wingo's going to be in the mix this year. I still think he's another one of those guys that just had some injuries, and we know the story on Mahogany is. So when I look at that draft by where the team was and what situation they're in by record and where they were going within for playoffs and stuff like that, I think it's a good draft. We it's tenfold because we have so many injuries that we say that's a terrible draft. But let's give them that third year and fourth year, which takes a lot of guys why they were drafted in those situations. Arnold's going to be the big one this year. He's got to have a great year for us.
All right, James.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at guys drafted in the first, outside of the first and second round, are usually, like Jerry said, somebody who doesn't play a lot usually until the second or third year. So Arnold played a lot. Rakestraw would have if had he not been hurt.
Mm-hmm.
He would have been right in there playing nickel. And so the rest of the guys are developmental guys, and Manu could still be something. Could still be turned into something. Could be a complete bust. Vaki at least gives them a good third string running back and an ace on special teams. Wingo is a nice rotational defensive tackle who's flashed at times and just kind of been a healthy scratch at times. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but he's been somebody who still at least has, I think, a lot of promise. And we know that Christian Mahogany is at least I think above average starting guard when healthy.
And that was a 6th round pick right there. So
Hmm.
I'm looking at this draft class is a number of these candidates are the ones that Dan Campbell said they're looking for some guys to step up and take a step forward this year to be bigger contributors. In his Rakestraw could be the number 3 defensive back on the outside, and he's got a lot of opportunity there. Giovanni Manu, is he going to be your swing tackle? Is he going to take a step forward, or where is he going to look at? Because we do know there's a tackle spot open right there, if not 2 of them. And Vaki's got an opportunity for expanded role in there, even though Isaiah Pacheco's been brought in. Dave Montgomery's no longer there. And Mahogany, what are we going to see out of him at left guard? So we do have a lot of potential for these guys. Coach, I do agree with you. You don't know yet. Usually it is at year 3, year 4, and this is year 3. So it's going to be very important, especially Terry and Arnold. That's a guy that I think a lot of people had high expectations on right away. It's been up and down. And so they're going to see, can his football play meet where the expectations were when we take the field this training camp? So, all right, because in addition to those guys, we've got some guys coming back from last year. Tyleek Williams was a 1st-round pick, Tate Ratledge in the 2nd round. Those guys were immediate contributors. You've got Isaac Tesla, who was a receiver in the 3rd. The Lions gave up their late 3rd round plus both 3rd-round picks in 2026, so they don't have a 3rd-round pick this year. And then Miles Frazier was taken in the 5th, Ahmed Hassanin in the 6th, and then Dan Jackson and Dominic Lovett in the 7th. And so, James, what are we seeing out of this group as we go into 2026? A year under the belt, 2 guys, significant playing time. Isaac Tesla, a little bit of playing time, and then it dwindles from there.
Yeah, Tyleek Williams is an immediate rotational guy at defensive tackle, and I expect him to take a jump this year. And with Aleem making a jump, hopefully this year too, with being year 2 back from injury, they could be a very potent combination there at defensive tackle. Tate Ratledge was an instant starter for them. Had a rough game or two at the very beginning, but then after that was a pretty, I would say, above average starting guard in the NFL, if not bordering on very, very good at times. So Law is going to be a guy that I think when they get a coordinator who can unlock him a little bit more, can be a game changer. I mean, if you put Jameson Williams and him on the outside and Amon-Ra St. Brown in the slot, you got to pick your poison. And then Miles Frazier had some moments last year. He was kind of delayed by injury too. A lot like Wingo or Mahogany last year. And then, Hassanin completely derailed by injuries last year. Same with Dan Jackson, Dominic Lovett, really kind of just sat on the sidelines most of the time. Played a little bit on special teams. And I think that's kind of what the role that they're looking for him is to kind of take one of those Khalif Raymond type roles.
All right, Coach, how about you? Any of your thoughts on these guys a year
Yeah.
in?
Yeah, I mean, we just, we first two rounds, they were on the field for us. They have a lot of numbers on us, and that's the thing is our third rounder Tesla, look out, look at the numbers he put on with with the body of work, how many reps he had and stuff like that. He's only gonna progress a ton more because of being in camp and the OTAs and the off seasons and not going from college to NFL. But now he's experienced all that. Frazier, again, he's another one of those guys. We don't know what the we're going to talk about the draft this year and what we're going to do. And if we don't, here's the thing: is to the fans out there, if we don't go after and get this guy or that guy because they think they're going to do it, then Miles Frazier's better than everybody thought he was going to be. He's been in camp. We know what he looks like. Haseen, I love him. I mean, he's going to be another one of those guys. So I think that's a good draft. I think it's guys going to be around. Some of them, probably the bottom three picks have to produce this year, because of what we brought in. But with the 1 year contracts. But I think I think it fit into our needs. And it wasn't. We didn't need 7, 8 starters out of that group.
All right. And yeah, I think it's exciting to see as productive as Tyleek Williams and Tate Ratledge were last year,
Yeah.
that they could even take another step forward this year because they both were solid and Ratledge especially. So that gives you confidence there knowing that those guys could do that. And Tace Law showed flashes and now he's got a full year under his belt. He's going to be the number 3 receiver. They're going to be looking to unlock him even more. He will have become that much more comfortable with the offense throughout this as well. And then the other guys, it's going to be interesting because as you guys both brought up, we've all brought up, they brought in a lot of competition. I don't think your roster spot is a lock just because you were drafted last year. I think you have to go out and produce, and that's going to put some pressure on some guys, even last year and the year before. If you were drafted in the 6th or 7th round, especially, but any of those, it's not a lock. You've got to produce because the line's looking for results coming out of training camp. All right. Well, there was one notable signing since our last episode. It came hours after our episode only, and that was Avonte Maddox is back with the club. 1 year deal, even more depth in the secondary. Could impact the draft. Coach, I know you're excited about this. James, you are as well, right?
Oh
Huge.
yeah, yeah. Big, nice depth piece for them. Another nice addition to the secondary. I'm going to imagine the Lions are still going to be looking hard at safeties at some point in the draft. And just to have some insurance policies, some young guys in case, Branch and Kirby are long-term things. But they're probably going to not look at corner as much anymore, even though I think there's some nice corners in like the 4th and 5th round area that I could totally see Holmes taking a bet on a gamble on just to have some extra depth because we've seen the last 2 years corner has been getting beat up and you can't have enough good corners.
No, you can't have too many of those. So let's talk about where we think the biggest needs are for the Lions. Now we know we hear, and we'll talk about this. Brad Holmes drafts for position and not position, value, talent, right? He drafts the best player available, not the biggest need for the team. But what are the biggest needs? Every mock draft seems to have the Lions taking an offensive tackle and a defensive end in the first 2 rounds, more or less. Some small variations from that. So, other than those 2 spots, what else do you think is a big need, Coach?
Uh, you know, here that let's go back to what we just talked about, the 2024, the 2025 draft. Where the guys and the free agents we signed, of course, but where those guys fit in from that draft, getting into their second and getting into their third year in camp is going to be where I think the need is going to come from. If that makes sense. I think that's where the draft is. Now, do we in the first round need to hit a home run at a couple positions? I think we do. I think we have to hit a home run at the offensive line position. Somebody that's going to come in right away, start again, the best person at the position. And then, of course, an edge. We're going to need an edge guy from there. I think safeties and corners and stuff. I saw a couple mock drafts. We're going to draft a wide receiver. I saw another one. We're going to draft a cornerback. I don't know. I still haven't figured that out. Now, the best the best, I'm going to tell you this, Brandon Donahue, who's the most accurate mock drafter for the last 7 or 8 years, he has us taking Caleb Banks D line. Okay, so that's, and it's funny because now there's just so many things out there. But again, I'm going to go back with, I think, we talked about that. We need to shore up an O line guy. We need to shore up an edge guy. I mean, future starters or starters at hand if the guys that we brought in and the ones don't develop from the last couple drafts.
All right, and we know everything starts with the offensive line for the
Yes.
Lions, which is why so many people are expecting them to go that route. I'm looking at linebacker as a spot that we'll take in later rounds. I mean, we don't have that many linebackers on the team right now, so I'm expecting them to draft somebody there. I'm really still high on them taking a tight end late in this draft just because Brock Wright is in the final year of his contract. Tyler Conklin's been brought in on a 1-year contract. I think you want to bring a young guy in a later round. I also think you want to bring a running back in late because Isaiah Pacheco's in on a 1-year deal. He is coming off those injuries. As much as an impact that they think he's going to make, I think it still makes sense to add somebody later to the mix. And then, depending when we get a D end, I don't know if this is possible. I think they might draft 2 D ends in this one. So, James, what are some of your thoughts on the needs for the positions the Lions should look at?
Yeah, obviously tackle and D end is what everybody wants. In the early rounds. In those later rounds, I think there's going to be a safety in there. In the middle rounds, there might be a corner in there depending on if somebody falls, that somebody that Holmes likes. And like you said, I think a tight end is a possibility, right? Running back is a possibility towards the end there. Um, and uh, and there are some pretty good developmental defensive ends at the end of the draft, who are bigger guys, like the guys that prototype the Lions like at defensive end, who they could draft in the sixth or seventh round, who are guys that they won't have to depend on to play a lot of snaps and they can work on for a year. Maybe they play some snaps here or there, but guys that they can get and then turn into that what they wanted with Marcus Davenport and Josh Pascal in that other defensive end.
Mhm.
All right. Well, draft capital. Here's what the Lions are going in with. Most people know the first and second round pick, 17th overall and 50th overall. No third round pick. They got 2 in the fourth, 2 in the fifth, 2 in the sixth, 1 in the seventh. And so that's a good number of draft picks. I think we know that Brad Holmes will probably move around a lot because that's what he typically does. So they could make this many picks or they could package some of them to move up. But before we get into specifics, what's the word on the street about the draft? What are some overarching thoughts you got, Coach?
On how we're going, where we're going, or what we're going to do. And
Well,
I go ahead.
no, so just what the draft looks like in general.
Yeah, I mean and I'm going to go back real quick from that other thing I was going to mention. I forgot to mention it. We are going to draft a quarterback somewhere in there in the draft. I
Okay.
think there's there's developmental guys because Hendon Hooker, he would have been the guy that was still there. He's not there, and it's been Holmes. What's it been 2 years since he's drafted a QB? So I
Makes
think
sense.
in the later rounds we're going to grab a QB. But anyways, one thing from our capital, what we have to draft from, I'm going through. If we're going to talk about what we're going to pick, how we're going to pick, who we're going to pick, when we're going to pick, I think it's going to be determined by the first 10 picks in the draft. And I think because you guys will bring that up too, but I think Holmes he's gonna jump up, okay, to get that knockout guy that he wants. He did that with the things he's did with the guys in the past. Or if too many of them or a couple of them go in those first 10 picks, I don't think he'll try to draft up inside 10, but I do see him drafted from 17 to 11 or somewhere in that area if it's somebody they need. Somebody that he has on that board. They got it circled. Every scout, every coach, everybody's pounded the table on that guy and said, we got to have him. And that's the guy that when they show the war room, when he's announced, when they all run around and go crazy and start headbutting each other, that's the guy they're going to go get. Okay. So
Okay.
I think that's the biggest thing with that. So, just in a nutshell, I mean, I can go through position stuff like that too. But I just think I think that's the one thing they're going to do, or they're going to move it back, and get a third round pick, something like that for it. And so that they can stack up on that because they still have 9 picks to deal with. So,
They do. And then again, an overarching idea for this draft for me is it's not a quarterback heavy draft early. There's
no,
not a lot of wide receivers early. So that means some of those other guys that would maybe get pushed down to the Lions
right.
might not get pushed down. And so I think that goes along with your first 10 picks idea thing is
Mhm.
that's going to impact the Lions a lot. Obviously, they don't want a quarterback or a wide receiver, but if a few more of those got drafted early, some of those other guys might be more likely to be available.
Right.
James, what are you seeing or what are you hearing?
Yeah, I can totally see. I think that Brad Holmes is going to make some moves. He's going to trade around. He's got probably too many picks for how many spots are open on the roster, really.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you got two fourths, two fifths, two sixths. I see him like Jerry said, either moving up in the first or the second. You could move back in the first and pick up some extra picks, and then use some of those to move back up in the second, as well, and get some of those guys that he wants. It depends on who falls at 17, and if he's sitting there at 17, and if he's got four guys that he really really likes, then he'll try to trade back for sure, and just be like, if I get one of these guys, I'm great. Let's pick up an extra second or third round pick, and get that, and then maybe package some of those other picks to move back up into the third round or second round again, and just get guys that he wants because. I don't know that there's 9 open spots on this roster right now. So are you going to draft guys in the fifth, sixth, seventh round that are just going to be sitting on your practice squad? Probably not, because everyone won't make it through waivers. So I don't think the Lions end up with 9 picks. They've kind of positioned themselves to do that because they've signed a lot of these veteran guys who cost pretty much the same as what a fourth or fifth round pick makes. A fourth round pick makes a little over $1 million a season. I mean, even if you're the first pick of the fourth round, you make $1.15 million a season. So that's pretty much like what the veteran minimum is. They've added those guys so that they can turn around and trade these picks and move up, and not really affect their salary cap. So they've been pretty frugal in free agency and adding these guys, filling holes, because I don't think that they intend to end the draft with having made 9 picks. I think they want to move up and make fewer picks than that.
So that's interesting then. So you have a veteran, someone who's played multiple years, making the same price or getting paid about the same that a fourth
Mhm.
round rookie would get.
Right.
And so the Lions will have somebody already in there that has experience versus trying to develop a later round person in that situation. So that's where you're thinking they're going to package some stuff to move up because they did make a lot of those veteran minimum or close to it signings. There is a lot of competition, and the Lions are probably in a different spot for developing players than they were a couple years ago. They want to be impactful now, coach. And it seems like that might be part of the shift we're seeing if we know what James is saying takes place.
Yeah, it is. And here's one of the things, and let's go back to that. And why I went to the top 10 picks. Daniel Jeremiah was one of the experts out there. I don't know if he's like this might be Daniel Jeremiah 3.0. He's got 3 edges going the first 10 picks. Okay. So if the Lions have earmarked or said we got to get an edge, we're going after edge. This is the guy we want, and he starts to fall or doesn't end up because some of the other guys don't. They don't have 3 edges going. They got 3 offensive tackles going. Or they got 2 wide receivers and a running back going. So that's when the thing is. When they put those big boards together. And I'm going to go back to the Sewell, right? Sewell is their number one off the big board when he came out. I think Gibbs was that number one guy too. I think JMO might have been 1 or 2 in that. So those are the ones that when you start seeing how that draft starts to fall, and then we talked about it last show. There's gonna be they're talking about this could be the biggest trade draft of all. In the first round of people jumping and hopping. We have 4. We got 4 teams with 2 picks, right? I think it's 4 teams with 2 picks in the first 32. Right?
I don't recall on that
Yeah, it's
number.
4 teams, and I was putting the thing together. So 4 teams with 2 picks. Let's say the Jets. Jets are number 2. Who are they going to take? a quarterback? Are they going to take a cornerback?
No.
Are they going to take that safety, or are they going to take a wideout? You see what I'm saying? So, are they going to take an edge because AG? So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. But and that's why I came up with the pick whether we move up or move back. Now, if those three edges go, and one of those three edges was the knockout guy for us, then we're going to go back to the developmental thing you just said. And we did that with free agency to make sure we had warm bodies until the guys we bring in can take over the starting roles.
All right. Well, before we get into what we think the Lions might do, let's talk about some guys that have caught your eye in the first couple of rounds. Some guys that you think the Lions might target. We know offensive tackle, defensive end seem to be the big topics, but anybody that's caught your eye here, James.
I mean, there was one report that said the Lions have zeroed in on Alabama tackle Caden Proctor, but I think that is complete smoke. He is exactly the kind of pick the Lions have shied away from in the last couple years, which is a big swing in the first round. A guy with a huge ceiling but a very low floor. He could be a guy that you might have to move to. There's big questions on whether he can play tackle, whether he's going to have the foot speed to play tackle. So there's a lot of people saying that there's a little bit too much Mekhi Becton and Aaron Gibson in him. I really don't see the Lions being in on him, even if he's there for them. The pick could very well be an offensive tackle. Obviously, that position also has one of the highest hit rates among all positions in the first round. If you, I think it was DraftWire did a study on this, and they determined to hit their definition of hit rate, I believe, was did they get a second contract from the team? And offensive tackle in the first round is 59%.
Oh.
The only position higher is center, which was 92% because far fewer centers are drafted in the first round. So tackle is the safest position to draft in the first round, basically.
James, did you
So
just pull an Aaron Gibson reference? Is that what I heard you do? You went way back and pulled an Aaron Gibson reference.
I did, I
Wisconsin
did,
tackle, am I right?
I did. Yeah. Sorry.
That's impressive. That's impressive. So, yeah. So, coach, offensive tackle, staying with that. I mean, that's the thing. You've got Monroe Freeling from Georgia, but now people are saying he might not be there when the Lions pick. And so, you know, what do you has any offensive tackle caught your eye? James brought up
Well,
a great case about Proctor, which makes a lot of sense.
yeah, Proctor. I mean, here's the thing. Well, Freeling's another one of those guys. Freeling is moving up the boards not because of his upside, okay, and because of his athleticism, but is he that knockout, line up, put a jersey on him? You're a starter. You don't even have to practice, right? Is he that plug and play guy? So I look at the ASU guy, Max. I'm not going to say his name, but Big Max as that guy that I think can jump right in there and start for us. Again, Francis from Miami and stuff like that. Are we going to see him? Blake Miller from Clemson again is another one of those guys. And you think about the programs. Here's the thing: is you think about the programs and where they came from. And we're not talking the end stuff, but look at the offensive tackle from Oregon against the great defensive end from Miami in the playoff game. I'm not mentioning names because we're not going there yet. And see who won that battle. And that's what the Lions are looking at. And the Oregon guy won that battle. I'm just saying. So that's my point is who do the Lions feel when they look at or see? Now, I like the smoke screen too about Proctor thing. I like that Lions are looking at him. Well, we better take him. And again, I go to those first 10 picks and have the Lions earmarked offensive tackle or defensive or edge as their go-to, or do they just go by the best available defense lineman or the best available offense lineman when they get the draft?
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump over to that defensive side of the ball then. James, edges, the Lions are they going to find an edge? We know that it seems there's a drop off in edge. If you're not drafted early enough in the first round or middle of the first round, you get someone second or third round, they don't tend to be nearly as impactful as what the numbers kind of back up. Is there an edge that you see the Lions maybe looking for in that first round or potentially someone that might be there in the second?
Yeah, one guy who was kind of slipping was guy not a guy that was going to be in the Lions' range, but is kind of moving back as other guys move forward here in recent and mock drafts is Keldrick Falk from Auburn. He's just slipping a little bit because I mean some of the production wasn't necessarily there at Auburn, but he's got he checks a lot of the boxes, a lot of the things that the Lions want. He's 6'6", 274, so he's that big defensive end. He's one of the youngest players in the draft because he's only 20. He only played 3 years at Auburn, didn't redshirt. Um, but he was a team captain, great character. He donated some of his NIL money to help one of the walk-on players get by while he was at Clemson. The biggest issue is that he's not fully developed yet. Since he's only 20. He never led the team in sacks or tackles for losses. But he's a scheme fit with the Lions. Even though they play a three-man front at Auburn, but he'd be the big fourth defensive lineman in the Lions 4-3. So I think he could be a good fit with DJ Wanham here. He wouldn't have to come in and play all the snaps right away, so they could sort of develop him a bit, but he could also see some action because he's already good against the run. So he's a guy that they can put in there and he's not going to hurt you. And he's that kind of Josh Paschal, Marcus Davenport guy that they've been looking for over the last few years. Akeem Mesidor from Miami, outside shot, but he's going to be 25 by draft day. And has an injury of foot history or of foot injuries. So, that's he checks a lot of boxes otherwise, but those two big things are kind of red flags.
Mhm.
Yeah, the interesting part you brought up about Falk was just some of that leadership stuff he showed. That's like right up the Lions' alley right there.
Hmm.
And you brought he's 20 years old, Mesidor is 25. And some of the research I've been doing, people are saying, well, a 25-year-old playing in college versus a 20-year-old playing in college, coach, there's a developmental difference.
Hmm.
And has Mesidor peaked? Has he reached that potential? And remember how young Sewell was coming out. Wasn't he 20 when he came out? And so you just saw continued growth. And if you're handling your business that age, it just, increases the chance for even more of a rise, coach. What else you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with all those. And again, there's 8 or 9 edges that you look at. The Parker from Clemson, I like. The Lawrence kid from UCF, I like. People don't talk about these guys. These guys are kind of the eighth guy, but those are guys that you look at and they say, man, they would fit in, with the Lions ordeal. And again, you got to go back to who is going to be that knockout. Do the Lions feel there's an edge in there that out of the top 5 or top 8 or ones that are going to fall or aren't going to fall that they honestly need to have, because which ones aren't going to, if you look at some of these other mock drafts and there's only one edge going in the top 10, that's a lot of pretty good edges falling to 17, right? Does that make sense? So yeah,
Yeah.
so it'll be interesting. I've got a ton of things put up to it. I'm kind of waiting until Monday, I think, to where I really want to go down and say that I think this is where they're going because it's what happens. Because I heard there's some big trade coming up tomorrow, or big trades coming in at right prior to the draft. So what are those other teams trading for? What who's going to follow the Lions in that situation?
All right, those will be the things to keep an eye on. Smokescreen Central, possible
Yeah.
trades. We'll keep our eye on all of that. We also
Hmm.
want to take time, let you know you should put your eye on Cherry Republic. We want to thank them for supporting our show. They're a Northern Michigan company, folks, and they're all about good food and good vibes. And if you're getting ready for the game, enjoying a summer picnic, their cherry snacks are perfect. Go check them out at cherryrepublic.com. Life, liberty, beaches, and pie.
Mhm.
All right, guys, we got to talk a little bit about draft strategy. Rounds one, rounds two. Trade up, trade down, what positions should be prioritized? We've hit on some of the players. I'm hesitant for a trade up in this one. And here's the reason. You trade up, it increases your need for success because you're putting more resources into it. And people are like, well, what if there's that offensive tackle in there? Do you give up extra resources? From what I've seen, you do not have the next Penei Sewell in this draft. Now, I was beyond the moon when we didn't get Jamar Chase and we got Penei Sewell. I was so happy with that move. And if there was a Penei Sewell in this draft, I would say, go get him. But from what I've read, coach, that guy's not in here. There's a lot of guys that are potentially very good, but all a variety of potential flaws, or maybe not flaws, but just something you're not quite sure of. So there isn't that surefire top guy that's going to dominate. And so I'm I'm hesitant to trade up in this one, Coach, just based on what I've read and what I've seen and the variety of things that we have available. I know it's going to depend how the board falls, especially those first 10 picks, but I would rather stay where they are. If you had to trade up 2 or 3 spots, maybe, but otherwise I'd stay where you are and move back just a little bit as far as trading up or down goes. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mentioned that earlier. The trade back, we're going to get some earlier, earlier round pick, second, third round picks that kind of withstand because we're missing some of those. Because then again, if you look at the depth on some of these positions that are of need, there's some really good depth. There's maybe not that knockout guy that, oh my God, like you just said with the Panay Sewell guy, but there's somebody that we can grab a little bit later on. And by week 8 or week 9 of the season, he may be starting, whether it's at the edge spot or whether it's at the line, the offense line spot. There is one guy, and I'm going to throw this out there because people are going to go crazy because this is a Brad Holmes thing. But
Yeah.
there is one guy I think is the ultimate offensive lineman, and it's a guard out of Penn State. And the guy, but anyways, my point is, if we do something like that, that's telling us that Frazier or one of those other guys are going to be able to take that tackle position that need be when it needs to be taken. So that's just my gut, because that is he. I think he's that one guy
So
that
it's about Vega Wane from Penn
yes.
State, left
Yeah, and I
guard.
think he's just
That's
that one guy that you just go, oh my God, he's a 10-year starter. He's going to be, maybe he's going to take. I don't know. Again, however they do that, it's going to be determined by what we already have under contract in our building.
all right, James. That is another spot, another person that we've heard, and it's like, okay, it's not the right tackle position or left tackle position. It's a guard who you kind of already have a guy in house that has been starting.
Mhm.
But if this guy is at that level, that's maybe a spot to consider. But I want to hear your thoughts on the trade up, trade down thing. I mean, there is, even though there's expectations, there's extra pressure for the Isaac Taslaw pick to hit because of all the resources given to it. And again, I'm not opposed to those. I loved the JMO trade up. I loved it because of the value we got and the potential, and it's starting to pay off, and it is paying off. He is doing well. But what are your thoughts on the trade spots? And then let's talk about offensive guard.
I could totally see Iwane being that pick. Holmes has a tendency of when he's not picking high in the first round of if he's in the back half of that first round and saying, is there a guy who's the best at his position in this draft? Then I'll take him. And that's the case with Vega. He's the best guard in this draft. So it wouldn't shock me a bit. But Brad Holmes, aside from when he's been picking really high and got Hutchinson and Sewell, when have we actually accurately guessed any of his picks in the first round?
Right.
We did not
He
guess the
is
Jameer Gibbs pick. I'll tell you that one.
he is the master of not letting anyone know exactly what he's going to do. So we can talk about this a lot, but
So let me ask you this then. All right. We talk about drafting a tackle. Now, you want your best offensive lineman on the left side, I still think. I know people say it's, quarterbacks are different today. The blind side, they don't always line up on that side, but it still seems like you want your best guy on the left side, at left tackle. I don't see anybody in this draft that's currently, as we speak, better than Penei Sewell. I don't see anybody on the offensive line that's better than Penei Sewell on the Lions right now. And is it not easier, correct me if I'm wrong here, Coach, is it not easier to get a right tackle than a left tackle in the draft? And so I'm wondering here, if you make the move to put Sewell at left tackle, I know you put in a different position, but he played it all through college and a little bit his rookie year. Would you be getting better value in the draft if you took a defensive end in the first round and a right tackle in the second round?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good call. And I think that's why, we talked about that earlier. And I think that's why with who they have signed in free agency, who they paid a guy $4.5 million in free agency, that they know. And then you have, and again, I'm going to bring Frazier's name up again. I'm going to continue to bring him up because he can play guard or tackle. Okay, I watched a ton of film on him as coming out of college, and so we're not in that building, and they're going to throw out as many smoke screens as they can. And if maybe it's Sewell can go to left, maybe Frazier can play the left tackle. We don't know. You know what I'm saying? And so but again, I think we're a great situation because we have the best athletic tackle. We are a little biased. We have the best
True.
athletic tackle that can play left side or right side in the NFL, and he's still a young guy. He's only 20, whatever. What is he now? I don't even know. 18, Sewell. I mean, he's young, and so we're setting pretty good. We don't. This is like, again, we go back. This is the draft. The Lions don't have to reach; they have to make sure it fits. And
Makes
if it
sense.
fits,
Yeah.
they're going to be in great shape.
James, how about you? Thoughts on going with a defensive player, defensive end in that first round, depending who falls, and then, maybe going right tackle or even left guard later.
I could totally see that. There's a pretty deep guy of edge rushers, so there's guys going to be guys there in the second round too. But you can say the same thing with tackle, is I think maybe even a little bit deeper with those second round guys. If I think guys like Miller and I don't even try to pronounce his name, like Jerry said, Max. I think those are guys that can fall into the second round. Um, and maybe even Proctor if somebody doesn't gamble on him. I mean, he's a big gamble. He could be a Sewell, and he could
Yeah.
be an Aaron Gibson.
Yeah.
So his ceiling is incredibly high. His floor is incredibly low. So you don't know what you're going to get on him. And that's why I think he's gonna fall a little bit. So I could see them taking those two positions. A guy in the second round for an edge guy that I like is Gabe Jacas from Illinois. I
Yeah.
think he fits scheme wise with what they want out of an end.
I like it.
Um, and would be a guy who could come in and play right away with Wanham, platoon him at end. But I could see him going either way. And part of it might just be, is there a trade available to be made? If we trade down, if there's multiple guys there that Holmes likes, does he trade down? If there's a guy tantalizingly just a couple picks ahead, does he move ahead? I don't think he's going to move up if it costs him like a second or a third round pick. So he's only going to move up a pick or two, maybe, and trade some of those extra fourth, fifth, sixth round picks just to move up a spot or two to get a guy that might be falling that he wants. Otherwise, I think it's stay where he's at or trade down.
Okay. Well, and offensive line is probably the most important part of this team because that's all we ever talk about. And so I do think the Lions want to shore that up. So I'm kind of expecting them to take offensive line in the first round, even, unless some incredible defensive talent falls. But here's the other pivot. Say they get that offensive lineman they want. I'm not 100% sure they're going to take a defensive end in that second round. I think they might take the best defensive player available, which could be a linebacker or maybe a safety, James. I mean, I do think, bringing in those guys, as you brought up, and don't rule out the chance of them still signing a veteran free agent defensive end to be a rotational player in there yet. So I wouldn't rule that out as a possibility either. I don't think it's a guarantee they will take a defensive end in round 1 or 2, as much as most fans would like that to happen.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and if somebody like Pons falls to them in the second round, I could see Holmes saying, I can't turn this down. We're going to take another corner. He's just too good, and he comes in and he plays right away.
All right, Coach, how about you? Could the Lions pivot to a different defensive position in the second round if they get that offensive guy in the first? And I mean, they're not going to reach on a defensive end if the guy that they want isn't sitting there.
Well, here you can go off of that too. If we do trade back to still have a first round pick and pick up some third round pick or something like that, I could see them, aligning it that way correctly. I mean, we have 9 picks that we can play with, even though a lot of those later picks aren't worth a ton, and then go after that free agent. But I think wherever their needs, the linebacker concept, I think they need one, but they do have the green dot, and the green dot we have is pretty dang good. and then the other ones that are with them with that. So I think they'll reach more with the linebacker in the later rounds, but I still think their priority is going to be is going to be the O line, D line in the first. I think the first three picks. To be honest with you.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that. And I think that would be the best fits. I agree. I'm just going to throw a thing out there in case something else happens different. So,
Yeah.
all right. All right, folks, quick reminder to you here. We are also available on social media. You can check us out there. If you're liking what you're hearing here, go to Not the Same Old Lions podcast at NTSOL podcast and take a look for us on Twitter. Would love to see your comments, reviews, and insights on some of the things we've been posting there and sharing there. So be part of that conversation. All right. Well, now let's take a look at what might be happening a little bit later. Rounds 3, 4, 5, 6. Who are some guys, James, that you think the Lions could target a little bit later in this draft?
Yeah, I got three edge rushers in mind here for later. One of them each kind of is like fifth, sixth, seventh round types. Caden Curry from Ohio State fits the mold of what they want. He's 6'3", 257, so he's got good, decent size to play the run. He had 11 sacks last year for Ohio State, graduated a semester early, so he's a smart guy. He was buried behind NFL guys at Ohio State and stayed there. Stayed with the program, didn't leave. And then when his turn came up last year, he was very productive and had 11 sacks. Um, Another guy who could be there in the sixth round is Florida edge Tyreek Sapp. He's 6'2", 273, the size that they covet. High character, high work ethic. Coach raised that he never has a bad day, and that he has an endless motor. So that sounds like everything the Lions want in a defensive end. Seventh round, two guys, Central Michigan defensive end Michael Heldman is a guy that the Lions have met with in one of their visits at one of the All-Star games. He's 6'3", almost 270, ran a 4.7 40, team captain. Run defense is good enough that he can be a three down guy. He kind of reminds me of Ahmad Hassanin, who they took in the
Yeah.
sixth round last year a little bit. Um, I think he's a little bit better than the Western Michigan edge, Nadami,
Mm-hmm.
because I think he's projects more as somebody who could play three downs, whereas Nadami is going to be mostly a pass rush specialist, which the Lions have not uh, shown that they really want to. He also, the MAC does have a history of producing good NFL defensive linemen, and it's interesting. I mean, since we're based in Traverse City and we have Glen, Cherry Republic and Glen Arbor here. Hellman proposed to his girlfriend, a CMU gymnast, at Sleeping Bear Dunes.
Yeah, there you go. It's a good call.
Another one late in the seventh round, I think, is Tyree West, an edge from Tennessee. He is a very under the radar kind of guy, but he's somebody that the Lions met with in person. He's a huge defensive end at 290 pounds. And he can move inside when needed. He's a guy that was a rotational guy even just at Tennessee. But I think he's somebody that the Lions could look at late in the draft as just another rotational piece at defensive end.
All right, there's a number of names out there. Again, the Lions have two fourth-round picks, and so those guys are going to be selected with the hope and anticipation, if they're drafting two in the fourth, is that they can make some sort of contribution this year, whether it's in a special teams fashion or in a rotational area. Coach, who are some guys that you've come across that their play stands out to you, maybe their character stands out to you that goes along with their play, that you're like, hey, maybe this is somebody in a later round that the Lions might take a look at?
I love Llewellyn from Iowa, the D end. I mean, that dude is he's a player. And I think I
Yeah.
was looking at their visit and stuff. I don't see that they talk to him, but he's one of those guys because I think it's throughout the last 5 years they've taken somebody off their 30 visits. They've
Yeah.
taken somebody off there. I was looking at the West guy that James brought up too because he's freaking monster. He can play inside, outside. He's got some twitch for 296, 290. So, the Barnum kid, the edge from Michigan, he's another one of those, one of those guys. They got some of those, that edge from Michigan. He looked good. I watched a bunch of his tape. We talked about the Parker from Clemson. I mean, there's there's so many of those guys that I think because you have all these big names, the top fives or the top eights, most of them lead for the talking about the edge guys, that there's going to be out of those top eight, how many are going to produce with what everybody say they're going to do. And we know there's going to be 3 or 4 guys that nobody hardly even heard about. And that's who the Lions will go after. And the one Lawrence I talked about from UCF, he's another one of those guys that he's listed, I think, in the top 8 on most of them. But that's 8. How many 8 D-ads now? If they take 3 in the first 10 picks, yeah, then there's only 5 left. But if it falls the way it's going to fall, then we got a good shot. So, but yeah, Heddleman, he's solid. From Central. I looked at him. He was with he was Finn's roommate, so I kind of watched his career. And so there's just some guys out there that you kind of go, okay, all right, this guy can play. One other guy that I saw was at the Hulu Bowl, All American Bowl. They talked to. I can't remember which one it was, but one of the somebody else that they met with at the bowl game and met with them in person. I wish I could. I've drawn a blank on the name now. Anyways, so those are the guys that I'll look at the next rest of the week before the draft and see if that's where they're going. So
Okay. Awesome. Well, this next question is kind of tough because you just don't know how the draft's going to go. And the question is, how do you think the Lions might attack the draft? What would you like to see them do? It's kind of like, well, it depends who's on the board, right? Because remember, the Lions celebrated when Olave was drafted by the Saints and that they could trade up and go get JMO. And so, based on what I've seen in this draft and class reading from all the mocks and the different analysis so far, I'm not looking for a major trade up. I'm looking for a trade back to pick up some more pieces so that you can try and get some guys in the second or third round that might be able to contribute either, if not push for a starting role, push for a heavy rotational role. And so, again, unless there's a clear cut winner, but I don't see one at offensive tackle or defensive end that they can go up and get, and they already don't have a third round pick. So I'm kind of like stay pat or just kind of move back just a little bit. But I want them to take 2 guys in the first 2 rounds for sure. I don't want them moving back out of that stuff or giving something away for the future. James, how are you thinking you might like to see the Lions attack this?
Yeah, I think, and this is going to sound like maybe the most obvious thing. They're going to take a right tackle and they're going to take a defensive end in this draft. But there's a reason for that. Brad Holmes has a pattern in his free agency moves. He when he signs guys that are more than veteran minimum contracts, he tends to draft players at that position. Last year, Roy Lopez signed him to a decent he's like a $4 or $5 million contract, and then they picked Tyleek. They re-signed Tim Patrick for $4 million. Then they drafted Taslaw and traded Patrick. The year before, they added a Meek in free agency and Carlton Davis in a trade. Then they drafted Terrian and Rakestraw. Um, the year before that, they added Montgomery. Then they drafted Jameer anyway. The year before that, they added DJ Chark to a $10 million contract, then drafted Jamison Williams anyway. So he does this a lot where he ensures himself of the guy that he wants, that he has a backup there in case he doesn't get him. So I think he is targeting a right tackle and he is targeting a defensive end in this draft that he wants. Whether who that is or when that is, I don't know. But those are judging by his history, that's where he's going.
I love that analysis, man. And that's a pattern you found too. So nice. Yeah. That offensive tackle, I'm going to go right with you on that because the Lions' number 2 and number 3 offensive tackles are gone from last year, right? Decker and Skipper. I look at Max Borum as offensive tackle 2.5. Okay. He's right between Decker and Skipper, coach. And I think you need to bring somebody else in that is equal to 2.5 or better. So that's kind of why I'm looking at it. So, playing off what James said, what would you like the Lions to do? What would you like them to attack or how go about it?
Yeah, I totally agree with what James said. It's great analysis on that because he's going to have, and we talked about that with the right tackle they got this year, where they signed
Borum, Max
Yeah,
Borum.
Larry Borum. Yep.
Larry
Larry
And
Borum.
Borum.
DJ
They
Wanham.
signed him and they gave him some money. Well, they give him some money. Well, because they know he can start, but if he can't start, oh my God, he's a great backup for $5 million, $4.5 million, whatever, if they can get a guy. So going off of that, my feeling, and I'll say it again, I want them to trade up in the draft if that knockout number one guy on their board is there to fill in one of those two positions, either the tackle position or the DN position. I want them to draft down if he's not there and get the second one, their second pick off of that board. Does that make sense? So I don't, and
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. I want to get some middle picks and stuff like that, but I just think we are in a situation where we got to get that guy where we plug and play that guy we throw on the field and he starts. And then we build everything else around him in that situation. And he's going to start for a long time. But that would be to trade up. If they're going to trade back, then they're going to add more to put pieces in there for these guys that James just talked about that they signing, that they will sit behind them, work with them until they can take that position over, and then we use that guy that we brought in as a backup, and our roster is chucked full of competition.
All right. Well, that is what they want this year is competition. That's what Campbell said they brought in. Uh, Something we've already referenced are those top 30 visits. Lions have been busy as everybody has. Out of these, what surprises me is not maybe surprised, but offensive lineman out of Oregon and offensive lineman out of Arizona State. The Lions are bringing these guys in, coach. And so some of them aren't supposed to be on the board, or if they are, it's going to be like, will they take them at that spot? So
Would,
the,
would, would
go
that
ahead.
be the offensive lineman for Oregon who played against the defensive end in a playoff game and dominated them? I don't know. I'm not mentioning any names. So
I'm just
thanks.
bringing it full circle. You brought it up earlier. I gotta say the Lions brought him in and looked at him.
Just saying.
Yeah. James, anything about those top 30 visits jump out to you?
A lot of linemen, but a lot of everywhere.
Yes.
So, Holmes is keeping everybody guessing. He's keeping every other GM guessing as to who he's going to take.
Yep.
So it's not like they just exclusively brought in defensive ends and offensive tackles and telegraphed it. And nobody would be shocked at all if Holmes took a linebacker or a safety in the
Yeah.
first round or something, would you? I mean, I don't think anybody would. Uh, you might want, a lot of people have their pet guys that they want, and Brad Holmes usually never takes them.
And
So just be prepared for that.
I
we
mean, some
talked
people are
about
saying Caleb Downs from Ohio State. If he
yeah,
was to be at a certain spot, would the Lions consider him?
yeah. I
But
don't.
go ahead, coach.
And again, that's the difference with and again, we talk about how he started and where he's built and put pieces in. I think this draft is a little bit more still going to be, we're not quite sure what he's going to do because that's what Brad Holmes does. But what he does is going to be a knockout situation that's going to jump in and help immediately because we don't, you can take the shots on the Gibbs and stuff like that because they're going to fill in eventually. But the roster has a lot of good pieces on it. I think they need that one that puts them over the top.
All right. And you had an interesting note on the top 30 visits for the Lions from the last 5 drafts, right?
Yeah, I think there's three of the last 5 they've taken somebody off of those 30 visits. I went through last year and tried to find it. And I think it might even be 4 or 5. But it's a good number. I always go through and look at those guys and kind of say, hey, did we take any of them? So, but yeah,
Yeah.
so that number's pretty, it's a pretty good scene. And I'm not sure how many other teams are to do that. So, but anyways.
All right. Well, it's time to hit that final thought section of the show. James, we'll start with you. What are your final thoughts here as we're getting ready for the NFL draft in less than 2 weeks?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of factors I think that are kind of new in evaluating NFL draft picks this year. One is NIL money. Teams already have an idea of how a player is going to react to having money.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Uh, you didn't know that coming in before, where you handed a guy, a first round pick, a $12 million contract. Now he's got a bunch of money, and then he becomes an idiot. You've got these high end college players. All these first round picks are high end 4 or 5 star recruits who got pretty sizable NIL deals in college. So they have money already coming into the league. So you know how they're going to behave with it. So I think you're going to see that as an extra recruiting thing, or just piece of information. And also GPS info is becoming more and more of a thing, where they can know exactly a player's in-game movement via GPS. So they know exactly to the hundredths of a second how long it takes a weak side linebacker in zone coverage to recover and get back to the point of attack, when the team does something different than what you thought, and all that kind of stuff. So those are a couple
Wow.
of things I think that NFL teams are using, some tools that the NFL teams that are using that are kind of new this year, that haven't been available too much before.
All right, Coach, how about you? Final thoughts.
Uh, just looking forward to it, just see where they're going with it, And I think the next I'm really looking forward to the next rest of this week and the beginning of next week to see how things start to shake out and to see where people are starting to look and looking at other people's visits and seeing where they're going with it. But it's gonna be fun.
Well, you know what I'm looking forward to? Your
Yeah.
draft party, Coach. I can't wait to get your printout and all the information you put
Yeah.
together there. So I'm looking forward to that. And I know I got your final thoughts already, but I actually have a question for
Yeah.
each of you, and I need
Yeah.
your final thoughts. An NFL roster has 53 players. The
Yep.
Lions didn't take 53 out of training camp because they said just because it holds 53, we didn't think there were 53 qualifying players, so they were like at 51. So we know the first round has 32 picks, but the Lions are not going to say there's 32 people worthy of being a first round pick. So I'm going to put the over under at 17 because that's where the Lions are drafting. Do you think, according to Brad Holmes and company, if it comes out, they will tell us there were more or less than 17 players who had a first round draft pick grade on them? James, start with you.
That's a good question. I think that he'll think that there was maybe a little bit more than that, especially guys that fit with their needs. So they may have given them a little bit of a bump up on that. So I'll take the over on that one, but not by
All
a
right,
lot.
Coach.
I'm gonna say a little bit. I'm gonna say a little under. And the reason I'm saying that is because I've been reading on how many first round grades do a lot of these guys have, and I'm getting a lot of mixed numbers, and none of them are as high as they were. I think it was last year, where the numbers were just unbelievable 30, 40 first round grades. And I can't find it. That's why when we talked about earlier, who's the knockout guy, I can't find them because I can't find how many are with that number one pick. So I'm going to say under.
All right. I'm going over, but I'm only going over by like one or two.
Yeah.
I'm saying like 18 or 19. It's going to be close. Obviously, there's 32. So even putting that number at 17 is it's quite a number. It's quite an adjustment on the scale there. And it'll be interesting to see if that does come out. Coach, James, thank you guys for all the insights, all the comments, all the dialogue. Folks, thank you for tuning in. Please tell your friends and family about the show. Find us on social media like Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok these days. Check out more episodes and content at notthesameoldlions.com. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.